This video is going to talk about kerning and tracking. I talked about it briefly in a video last week, but I'm going to go over it in a little bit more detail here and also talk to you about different paragraph alignments. I'm currently in InDesign and I'm going to zoom in on this title to talk about fine-tuning about kerning and tracking. You generally will not have to worry about changing the spacing between your letters in body copy unless you're doing it in a global tracking manner. But for headlines, it's really important to have good spacing between your letters. Now, this title here is pretty well spaced, but I can certainly alter the spacing between the letters if I want to increase or decrease it. When you're changing the spacing between two characters only, that's known as kerning. And in your character panel, which you can access by going to your window drop down and going to Type and Tables, Character, and also Paragraph. Here, if you mouse over this area here in your character panel, you'll get the kerning. And kerning is a spacing convention, and it's a very small unit called thousandths of an em. Very, very small spacing changes you can have here. The default is 0, but if you click on the drop down, you get negative numbers and positive numbers. These are suggested settings only. You can certainly type in whatever you want. So I'm going to go to -25 here, and you'll see that everything is moved over. The spacing here has changed and the rest of the letters just come with it. Okay, so we've tightened up the tracking here a little bit. That looks pretty good. If you want to widen letters and move letters farther away from each other, let's say that we wanted to move the T over, you would go, rather the Y, over to the right, you would go to a positive number and you see how it moves away. And you can fine tune it by typing in whatever you'd like. So basically speaking, when you type on the computer, the spacing should be quite uniform, but once in a while, depending on the letters you're using and the font, you might have to go in and do some kerning. It's done in your type tool and it's using this kerning block on the character panel. If you wanted to change the global spacing of a whole phrase or headline, you would use this box here, which is tracking. And that takes, it works the same way with the positive and negative numbers, but it then, and I made it too big and now the box isn't big enough. This is a good tip, by the way. If ever you see that red little plus sign in InDesign, that means that you've got hidden copy. Your box isn't big enough. You can see how widely tracked that is, and sometimes that can work, but often you don't want it to be quite so high, so you might want to tighten it up. That's a -10. And of course you can get really dramatic with it, then the letters start touching. But it's easy to change and you can always go back to 0 to go back to your default. So kerning and tracking are easy to work with, and you want to develop a sense of where you notice inconsistencies in spacing. Okay. I'd like to talk now about paragraph alignments. I have the same paragraph here set in 5 different ways, and you can change them with your paragraph alignment palette here with the little icons. Also up on your control panel you get the icons for your paragraphs as well. This one is very common. It's called flush left, rag right, and you can see it's straight on the left and ragged on the right. Very readable. It's the default for most word processors and for the Adobe programs. Flush right, rag left is not as commonly used in paragraphs. In fact, you don't want to use it because it makes that important left side too raggedy for comfortable reading. Flush right, rag left is usually used for things like captions or addresses, anything where you want some good balance, but always for short pieces of type. So we don't use a paragraph this way. We don't use a paragraph for centered either. Centered text gives rags on both sides, and it's best used for things like poetry, invitations, advertising, things like that. And then this one here is called justified. This is a wonderful alignment. However, it's wonderful because it creates rather a flush side on both sides, but the downside of justified is that sometimes, because the type has to stretch to fit, we sometimes get awkward word spacing and letter spacing in the lines. And you can see that here, where I have a narrow paragraph, these awkward word spacings have come through. And when they're connected like this and they flow down the page, that's called a river. We want to avoid that. And you'll notice too, we also have a little orphan here at the bottom. And that is definitely something to avoid. And how do you fix it? Well, you go to your type tool and you're going to work with your tracking here. You can either, you want to go back to your character panel, and you can either tighten up your tracking to make it look a little better. That looks pretty good, although we still have spacings that are awkward in here. So sometimes you will select only one line and you'll adjust its tracking to straighten it out. In this case, I'm increasing the tracking to say 25 here to make it look a little better. And that also did get rid of the orphan there. Okay, so this work here in InDesign with your kerning and your tracking, this is advanced InDesign, and it's really important for graphic designers to work with, because good type treatments and good spacings are really the hallmark of an advanced and accomplished graphic designer. So I'm hopeful that you'll get to know your kerning and your tracking scales and how they work, and also learn to recognize when you need to go in and adjust those settings. So good luck and enjoy.